Welcome to the Speaker's Corner show. Hopefully it will be ready in time to be broadcast today. If not, you can see this on YouTube and maybe it will be broadcast another time on the radio. So I wanted to make a quick series of comments about the events that have been happening over the last week or so. The most significant, of course, was the events surrounding the murder and body disposal of Sarah Everard. Now, a police officer quite high-serving police officer has been charged. So, naturally, the anger of people about the opportunity, if you like, provided by being a police officer to harass people and stop them on the street, for example, asking for reasons why they're on the street. This seemed to me to be the main focus that people should have around the events that have happened. Now, when the officer was arrested and charged, it was notable that a large number of people took the question up as male violence against women, which of course is perfectly legitimate. But given the circumstances that the police officer seems to be the primary suspect and has been charged, there is a double edge to this. There is the general question of violence, which is male versus female violence, and then there is a specific question of police power and the abuse of power. And we've lived in this country for a year with the most draconian dictatorial powers over the people that have existed in modern times. Probably you'd have to go back to sort of theocracy to draw parallels to what has been going on in Britain and elsewhere in the world as well during these strange times that we live in. And clean that lens a bit. Is that better? Yeah, a little bit better. So I tried to draw attention to that at the vigil. Now, I do understand that some people found it offensive that I stand up and speak a man at a rally for a vigil like that. But nevertheless, I felt, because of the way in which the repression of free speech and the repression of demonstrations, protests and so on, which actually are guaranteed under Article 10 and 11 of the European Convention and the Human Rights Act, I felt we had to go ahead and make an environment where people can protest, can debate, can argue, and can also protect each other. You need collectivity, you need free expression, you need the ability of people to say what they think, to get together, to combine. Otherwise, you can't win rights on a Zoom meeting. You can only win rights by taking to the streets, by going on strike, and you can only protect people. I mean, this was the issue a year ago when the pandemic began. At that time, I was all in favour of lockdown. Well, lockdown. I called for a de facto general strike. It's slightly different from lockdown. Lockdown implies the state imposes upon you restrictions on your movement. A general strike imposes the people take control over the collective community life and ensure the protection and safety of all. And that's the distinction between what I was arguing and what has happened around the world, but in particular in Britain. And therefore, epidemiology for me in an outbreak is about the collective coming together and identifying those who are in need and who are become ill and protecting them and securing their livelihoods and then reopening society at a higher level of collectivity. Now, that may well have been a utopian dream in the circumstances. It seems that, well, it clearly was, but I mean, but that's how we have to deal with these things. The community in each area, not only here but in the world, has to be able to come together in order to protect health, but everything else as well. That's what, socialism is supposed to be. The unit, and not just socialism, even liberal democracy is supposed to be that. But of course, it's always hindered by the interests of big business. Now, so what happened is that initially I went on the stage and I spoke and focused on the arrest of the police officer. And some people, I guess there was a sort of liberal wing who seemed to imagine that this was a vigil and therefore, how can anyone make it into a protest? Well, it was made into a protest not by me. It was made into a protest by the fact that the government, or better said, the High Court and the police said it was illegal. And therefore everyone who was there, whether they were booing me or cheering me, at the beginning there was nobody cheering me, everybody was breaking the rules. And obviously Sarah Everard, it said in the news, she was visiting a friend. Well, good. But that means she was also breaking the rules. And anybody who's out, Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, she went down to the vigil, not wearing a mask amongst groups of people. I mean, I don't believe she should wear it. It must be ridiculous to wear a mask in the open air. But she wasn't. And she went in amongst the people there, and it was clearly not permitted. It wasn't an exercise, is it? It was she was remembering Sarah Everard and the fact that she was killed. And that was deemed illegal by the police. Well, therefore, I am as guilty as Kate Middleton. And anyone who attended those events was also guilty. Now, we have a society in which people are supposed to be lying all the time. The regulations say this is allowed, that this is not allowed, and everybody has to lie. Because in order to carry on with a semblance of normality without going insane, you have to break the regulations. So this is the distinction between something created by the people to protect the people and something imposed from above in the name of the people. When actually, and it was actually interesting the other day, the slogans that came up. And when I returned, after initially being escorted away by the police, I returned to the scene of my crime, as you say, and the whole mood had changed. And there was a group of young women called Sisters Uncut who do this sort of mic check thing, like they used to do in Occupy. So one person will shout out what their speech is. So we must love and protect each other. So everyone then shouts out, we must love and protect each other. So it echoes, it multiplies the voice of the speaker. And then I came with a megaphone and I joined in and I gave the megaphone to people who were chanting or shouting. I encouraged them to do so through the megaphone and to escalate their demands and make their voice louder. Give people a voice. Well, that's what I've been doing at Speaker's Corner since 1986, trying to express my point of view in front of all others, with Christians, Muslims, with right-wingers, left-wingers, anarchists, eco, anti-eco, flat earthers. That's what we do at Speaker's Corner. That's what that's what Britain is famous for. Having people say what they think. When I was a kid, I remember people always just say, "You should be at Speaker's Corner." people say whatever they like. And the people used to go past, you know. I remember I worked on the buses in 1988. People used to go, oh, that's Speaker's Corner. Anyone can say what they like. Like, there's nutcases there, but I defend their right to say what they like. And so what we've had over the last year is the complete suppression of people's speech. They've been silenced by many means. There's been censorship on social media. There's been, I mean, you look at Parliament. Compare Parliament 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. You know, there's raucous scenes, remember? The proroguing of Parliament, protest. You know, protest outside, protest inside. And now you have a couple of ministers answering a screen. And the MP sitting carefully in front of a well choreographed image of what they want to project of who they are. And they sit in front of a Zoom meeting, and that's called democracy. Meanwhile, our lives have been destroyed. Our living standards have been smashed. Employment has dropped off the radar. The shops are shut. We can't go for a drink. We can't enjoy it. You can't even meet your friends on the street and drink a cup of tea together, according to the law or the rules they've imposed. Of course, people do it anyway. But it makes everyone into a bunch of liars, hypocrites, because, you know, you don't tell the other people you're with who might be paranoid, for example. And so you get this schizophrenic world. You know, the Portuguese cafe down here, for example, they got a big freakery about masks. And the one thing I was a bit upset about on the demonstration, the rally, let me just return to that point quickly. So when I went back to the demo and I was giving the microphone to people to express their ideas, to find a voice, the people need to find a voice. And you know, that event on Saturday, it was a big turning point. And I'm glad to have played some minor role in helping that turning point happen. And it was a turning point, you know, there's the famous quotation by Archimedes. Give me a point. Give me a point of reference. Give me a fulcrum, and I will move the universe. That's what he said. And that was what happened at the bandstand at Clapham Common. It was a point of reference, a place to stand, and then you can see the world around you from observing that position, that place, and finding the way in which that place can move other places. And soon it was spreading. And it will now be impossible for the government to reimpose control over demonstrations and protests. And that was the same last year when Black Lives Matter happened. I remember going to speak, somebody might remember radio shows from the time. I remember going to Speaker's Corner when Black Lives Matter turned up at Speaker's Corner on a Sunday. And Steve Barnes, the police officer who used to be a wonderful liaison officer with the Speaker's Corner community, he was standing there, and I went up to him and I said, "How's things, Steve?" I said, "So we've got Speaker's Corner back then?" And he goes, "Well, yes. You know, because everything like this is about balance of forces. The police and the courts have not made a decision that says coronavirus legislation must be enforced exactly as it says in the law, because obviously what has happened is the police, because the rules are so ubiquitous in their reach, you know, you can follow someone into the Yorkshire Dales, you can charge someone with driving too far to go for an exercise, you can arrest someone for having more than 3 people in their house, or even 2 people in the house, or alternatively you can leave it. And therefore a police officer has become accustomed not only to hypocrisy, because they break the rules themselves and then they have to go and enforce them, but also to arbitrary power. And it's a terrible thing when you give people arbitrary power over others. It's like the Stanford experiment, Milgram. They got people in white coats who could hear the person in the next room getting electric shocks, and they just kept increasing. And the scientist in his white outfit kept saying, "Carry on with the experiment," and I think everyone did, until eventually people were in the next room they were screaming, and yet they still carried on, because authority functions a lot like that. And if there's the famous quotation, some British lord, I can't remember his name, Lord Acton I think it is, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the only way to break that power is to make it subject to accountability and to mobilize the people to expose it and to take their own power back. And you see, this is what happened at the vigil on Clapham Common, is the people, and of course as in much of history, the most oppressed people are the women. And the women stood up. And when they stood up, you should have seen the faces of the police when they were surrounded by women chanting and shouting out there. You could see, and I've seen this before in history, when fraternization occurs, it means that the state apparatus, the armed bodies of men in defense of property relations and of the existing social order and political order, when that begins to break down, that unity inside the police, if they fear, you see in their eyes, they fear, they're shocked, they're scared, they're frightened, and they're embarrassed and ashamed at what they're doing. And when that happens, the state has to adjust itself on pain of a split in the forces of the state, and thereby opening up the path to revolution. And the ruling classes know this. That's why, of course, they've all suddenly, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, in fact, in Bishop's Park in Fulham, a young woman by the name of Celine, she suffered the most brutal attack by the police. And when I protested, the police charged me. And they arrested me then after that as well. But they dragged her, about 30 of them, with her arms behind her back. I'm not sure whether it dislocated her shoulder, but it was pretty close if not. And then they detained her for 24 hours in a police station, regularly being visited by doctors. And had she lost it, they might have sectioned her. And there's a case in Scotland just now where they actually sectioned a man after he was arrested on a protest demonstration. So it's almost like the Soviet Union. They used to do that. If you don't agree, they arrest you, and then they find some ground to section you. It's quite extraordinary. And so many people have been silent about the barbarities imposed in the name of coronavirus legislation, that people were almost, when the police took me from the stage on Saturday, some people were cheering. But that mood changed, you see. So it reveals, what did this reveal? This is the question, because that's why Priti Patel and all the others are all worried now. What exactly happened, they think, And some people are presenting, some Marxist agitator did it, or some Sisters Uncut did it. Just people were too loud with their megaphones. No. That's not how things happen. That is the mindset of a policeman. When a rebellion breaks out, they always say, who did it? Who was responsible? Because normally people don't do that thing. They behave themselves. They obey authority. But you see, once you get an accumulation of discontent growing, and God knows we've got enough grounds for discontent after a year of this madness, this absolute psychotic madness. So you only need a tiny spark. What is this here? This is Portobello Road. Look, all this here. What is all of this? Why is Portobello actually a good place to live? And it's because the carnival began as a rebellion of the people. A rebellion of the people. And the rebellion comes because there is real, deep-seated discontent. At that time, over racial issues. But the racial issues were also class issues. It wasn't just that black people were oppressed, it was also that they were oppressed not only as race, but also as class, so the double oppression. And of course, women suffer that during this lockdown more than any other group in society. They're the ones who have to, who are raising children in conditions of madness, forced to be at home when they should be outdoors. No cafe or restaurant open. No place for people to go with their children. It is absolute insanity. And all the evidence has shown that people don't catch this virus in the open air. So why are we always told to stay at home? And in fact, the staying at home causes infection, because when they initially locked down, there's been considerable evidence for this, also in Wuhan, that because it's the intimate connection you need a quite a long period of time in communication with someone at very close distance. I don't know, this has never been explained to people. Okay, Heinrich Streeck, and actually, occasionally some of the virologists explain it, but they've never emphasized how long do you spend with someone in order to get infected with a coronavirus. And it takes time. You have to spend time intimately with someone. Initially, Christian Drosten, I saw a video interview him. He's kind of King Corona. And he said about an hour. And track and trace in Britain started from the assumption of 10 minutes. So, in other words, it would only alert you if you'd spent more than 10 minutes in close contact with someone, I think within a meter. But 10 minutes being the minimum time you require. So most infections will not happen in 10 minutes. So in other words, people infect their partner. They go home, they catch it somewhere, and then they infect, at work or something, and then they infect their partner. There were super spreader events and all that, but that's connected to ventilation, you see. The funny thing is, why don't we learn from what we know, In a year, there are no documented cases of people catching coronavirus on aeroplanes. Yet millions and millions of people have travelled by aeroplane. And why is this? It is because the ventilation systems remove the air and change the air every 10 minutes. So if we lived in an environment in which all workplaces, all supermarkets, all churches, all bars and clubs change the air every 10 minutes, it would slash infection rates for not only for COVID-19 but for all respiratory illnesses. You see, in 1854, when the cholera outbreak broke out in London, the epidemiologists went in, and the medics better said, epidemiology didn't exist then, it was created from the 1854 cholera epidemic in London. And they went into the community, they examined Golden Square, 800 houses in Golden Square. They went into them and looked at the condition that people lived in. And then they made general reforms to health, to the environmental, or to the approach to the environment in which people live, work, and have leisure. And this led to big improvements in public health. including the sewage system that was created, which was important for cholera itself, but also dealing with ventilation, which laid the basis for eliminating or reducing the amount of people who died from reducing the amount of people who died from respiratory illnesses and other airborne, or better, it's not airborne, but droplet infections. Now, there are a number of articles that have been published in the last, I saw one in Byline Times, directly accusing me of hijacking the vigil. These people are completely mad. Completely mad. I don't know what's happened to people that they just want to accuse, so much like you snitch on your neighbour, it's the mindset that develops when you get this sort of crisis state of mind. Back in the day, you used to curtain twitchers who were looking out what the neighbour did all the time. But actually, when they got out, normal life, they might be lonely, nothing else to do. But now we have, and unfortunately, it's something that seems to affect left-wingers for some reason more than people who are not so political. I'm sorry to anyone who feels affronted by me saying that, because I'm the organiser of the Karl Marx walking tour, But for some reason, it seems to be that there's a relationship between, the sort of PC left world, who like to correct people's language all the time. And again, at Speaker's Corner, we don't do that. We debate with people no matter what their point of view. And I don't know how you can avoid that. Some people seem to think, if we declare this word is correct and that word is not correct, that if you just delete the word, that everybody else will have to repeat the right wording. And if they don't repeat the right wording, they'll get a sort of, almost like a passport to enter a room to be able to attend something. Are you acceptable? Just like you go COVID passport, Are you an acceptable person? Do you say the right things in the right circumstances? Do you not offend people with your, with your crudeness, your crassness, But everybody comes from a background. Marx, he once pointed out, tradition weighs on the mind and the masses, on the backs of the masses, like a mountain on their back. How can you ask someone, just an 80-year-old person, to adopt every linguistic twist demanded by, cancel woke culture? It's ridiculous. It's just farcical. It's like, I remember when in my student days in the 1980s, there was a group of people who attacked me at the time, and again it was all about, he doesn't say this right, he doesn't say that right, It's just bizarre, be honest, bizarre. And I do laugh about it. On the other side, it is quite dangerous, because there were a number of posts in the last few days. The most bizarre things. Someone accusing me of being transphobic. Ridiculous. Yeah. Then you have, someone saying, oh, it's a man speaking. Well, I went round, as I've always done at Speaker's Corner, trying to encourage others to speak up. I don't believe we should have protests that are, the standard protests from the left, for example, in Britain. It's a sickness in Britain that the protest organisations always have the same people speaking. Whether they're good or not speakers, it makes the audience, the protester, into a passive recipient at the protest. It doesn't make them active subjects of change or agents of change. They are instead objects to be brought onto a demonstration and spoken to and then told to go home. And you see on the vigil the other day, some local Labour councillor who obviously was opposed to holding a rally was dragged out to go and speak to the people and say, now's the time to go home, please all go home peacefully. as if she had the right to call them there and send them home. And you see, once the people broke the rules, went to the event, that set in the motion of change. And I believe this change, I hope and believe this change is unstoppable. And we will be at Speaker's Corner on Saturday, trying to reclaim Speaker's Corner. And we will hold speeches from different points of view, and we encourage anyone who is in favour of masks, who is against masks, who supports the lockdown, who opposes the lockdown, who supports Black Lives Matter, who opposes Black Lives Matter, who supports the Shia, the Sunni, who's a Christian fundamentalist, who's a Mennonite, who's a Catholic, who's an English church supporter, who's a monarchist or an anti-monarchist, who's an anarchist or a syndicalist. We welcome everybody. Speaker's Corner, that's what this show is. The Speaker's Corner show, representing Speaker's Corner. We stand for free speech. We stand for democracy. We stand for the right to protest, the right to organise, the right to debate, and the right to challenge authority and power at every level in society. From inside the household, where patriarchal power can be challenged by children and by women, inside community, where the power of the state and the power of the local bureaucracy is exercised against the people rather than for the people or by the people. Inside workplaces, where managerial power and corporate profit making overrule the power of the interests of the workers and the consumers. The consumers and producers need to control society, and as society reopens, the people must control the process, and they are doing everything to try and neuter the people, to make them passive recipients of the opening up granted to us. I believe we have to take control of the processes of opening up. We need to take control of public safety, whether it be the protection of women or the protection of public health or the protection of those who've been driven mad in the last year, the protection of employment rights, workers' rights, students' rights. I've said enough for now. More coming soon. That was the Speaker's Corner show for this week. Tune in, same time, same place, 3 o'clock, 104.4 Resonance FM in London.